You're standing at the edge of a continent. Ahead of you, nothing you recognize. No path, no people, no word in your language for the water you're about to cross, Bayao, because nobody's crossed it yet, so nobody's needed the word. Behind you, the place you're leaving is dying. And somehow, your descendants are going to be born on the other side of that horizon. Every continent on this planet except Antarctica has human footprints on it. Not because anyone planned a route, because someone, somewhere, kept walking into the unknown and never came back to tell anyone what they found. Here's where it actually starts. Genetic studies of mitochondrial DNA, the DNA passed down only through mothers, point to a major out-of-Africa migration roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. That's the wave that produced almost everyone alive outside Africa today. But, and this is the part most documentaries skip, that wasn't the first attempt. Archaeological finds in Israel and Arabia, sites like Skul and Kafze, show human presence outside Africa as far back as 90,000 to 120,000 years ago. Those groups made it out. And then, as far as the genetic record shows, they left no surviving descendants. They just stop. No dramatic ending recorded. No explanation. The evidence goes cold. Think about that. An entire population's ancestors. Gone. And the only reason we know they existed is a few bones in a cave. You think migration meant following a plan? Water here, food there, next stop marked on some mental map. Actually, there was no destination. Groups moved toward wherever there was still food and water left, generation after generation, without a single person in that chain ever intending to cross a planet. Nobody set out to reach India. Nobody set out to reach Australia. They just kept not stopping. One major route left the Horn of Africa and crossed the Red Sea at a strait called Bab-el-Mandeb, the Gate of Grief. During the Ice Age, sea levels dropped low enough to narrow that crossing and expose coastal shelves, turning an impossible swim into a survivable one. From there, groups followed the coastline through Arabia, then Persia, then India, hugging the shore because the sea fed you even when the land behind you couldn't. Here's the detail that changes how you picture this. It wasn't a hike, it was a relay that outlived everyone running it. No single person walked from Africa to India. Children were born mid-migration, grew old mid-migration, died mid-migration, while the movement itself kept inching forward for thousands of years after they were gone. You are the finish line of a race none of the runners ever saw end. At a site called Jebel Faya in the UAE, researchers found stone tools dated to roughly 125,000 years ago. Evidence of one of these early coastal pushes made by people who had no idea they were part of anything that would eventually reach every landmass on Earth. They weren't explorers. They were just the ones who didn't die this generation. Now here's the part that stops making sense. At a rock shelter called Majid Bebe in northern Australia, archaeologists found tools and pigment dated to roughly 65,000 years ago, which sounds like just another data point until you remember Australia was never connected to Asia by land. Not even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age. There was always open water in the way. Getting there wasn't an accident. Nobody drifts 60-plus miles on a log by chance and lands somewhere in numbers large enough to found a population. It required boats, deliberate ones, built by people who had never seen the place they were sailing toward, using vessels we have zero physical evidence of. Because wood doesn't survive 65,000 years. Not one splinter. Sit with the actual mechanics of that. Someone built a boat capable of carrying enough people to start a population. Not one traveler, a founding group, loaded it with children, and pushed off into open water with no visual confirmation that anything existed on the other side. They could not see Australia from Asia. There was no smoke on the horizon, no birds flying home to somewhere, no signal at all. They went anyway. And almost nobody talks about the failure rate. Most of those first crossings almost certainly didn't work. Boats were lost. Entire family groups vanished at sea with nobody left behind who even knew they'd died. Because there was no behind checking in. No search party, no news getting back. We only know about the ones who made it, which means the true story of that crossing is mostly a story we can't tell, written by the people who never arrived anywhere. Back in Lake Mungo, Australia, the same continent nobody was supposed to reach without a land bridge, researchers led by geologist Jim Bowler found something that changes what reaching Australia even means. A skeleton, now called Mungo Man, deliberately buried and covered in red ochre carried from a source more than 200 kilometers away. That means someone hauled pigment across 200 plus kilometers of unfamiliar ground to bury a body with color and ceremony, roughly 40,000 years ago, in a place his ancestors had occupied for barely 20,000 years themselves. They hadn't just survived the crossing, they'd already built rituals around death on the other side of it. Wait, that's not a small detail, that's the whole story. Reaching Australia wasn't an ending. It was a beginning generations deep, before anyone bothered writing anything down, because nobody could. Now flip to the other side of the planet, tens of thousands of years later, and the story gets even stranger. During glacial periods, falling sea levels exposed Beringia, a wide stretch of ground connecting Siberia and Alaska where ocean sits today. Genetic and archaeological evidence puts human arrival in the Americas somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 years ago. Standard version: people walked across, then filtered south through an ice-free corridor once the glaciers pulled back enough to open one. Except that isn't the whole story. Archaeologist Tom Dillahay's excavations at Monteverde, in southern Chile, dated human occupation there to roughly 14,500 years ago. A problem because the ice-free corridor didn't fully open until somewhere around 13,000 years ago. People were already thousands of miles south of it before the only route in existed, and Monteverde isn't alone. At Cooper's Ferry in Idaho, archaeologist Lauren Davis and his team dated tools to roughly 16,000 years ago. Again, before the corridor was passable. Two sites, two continents apart, both saying the same inconvenient thing. The official route wasn't the only route. You think there was one migration, one path, one moment everyone agrees on. Actually, the evidence points to two completely different survival strategies overlapping in time. Some groups walking through one of the coldest, most exposed stretches of ground on the planet, no trees, wind that could kill exposed skin in hours, using the same fire and shelter technology it took humans generations to master. While other groups paddled down the Pacific coast, living off kelp forests and marine life the whole way, part of what researchers like John Erlandson call the kelp highway. Two opposite strategies, same blind destination. Proof of that second route sits at the bottom of a flooded cave in Mexico. In Hoyo Negro on the Yucatan Peninsula, divers found the near-complete skeleton of a teenage girl researchers named Naya. Her skull, pelvis, and teeth preserved almost intact after resting underwater in near-total darkness for over 10,000 years, roughly 12,000 to 13,000 years old, one of the most complete early American skeletons ever recovered. Her skull looks different from later Native American skulls. For years, that difference fueled a theory that two unrelated populations reached the Americas separately. Then her DNA came back. Same population. Same ancestral line as the Beringian migrants. The skull shape wasn't a different ancestry, it was time and environment reshaping the same people generations later. You'd think a different skull means a different origin. Actually, it just means she's further from home than her ancestors were when they started. Follow the consequence forward. Because those crossings kept succeeding instead of the whole species dying out in one bad decade, humans ended up with breeding populations on every continent but one, which meant no single disease, drought, or predator could ever wipe out the species in one place at one time. That redundancy is the actual reason you exist to complain about legroom on a plane. Every founder population that made it was an insurance policy nobody alive at the time knew they were buying. Here's the third order effect, and it's the one that lands closest to home. That same restlessness didn't switch off once the continents filled up. It just ran out of unmapped coastline to aim at. The person who quits a stable job for an uncertain one moves cities with no plan, leaves something safe but wrong. That's not a modern character flaw you need to fix. That's the same trait your ancestors used to survive, with nowhere left on the map to point it at except your own life. Here's what ties every one of these crossings together, and it's the part that should actually bother you. No compass, no maps, no writing, no way to send word back if a route worked, no way to warn the next group if it didn't. Every single migrating group made an irreversible decision inside a total information blackout. Once you crossed, you couldn't uncross, and nobody coming after you would ever know what you'd already learned the hard way, at the cost of your own life if it went wrong. Your brain is built to want confirmation before it commits to anything. A plan, a job, a move to a new city. You'll refresh a map 5 times before leaving the house. Theirs had no confirmation available, ever, and it moved anyway. That's not recklessness. It's the exact same trait that let a hairless, slow, physically unimpressive species outsurvive cave lions and short-faced bears. Pattern recognition, planning, and knowledge passed down just barely fast enough to matter. Those aren't separate stories. It's one trait doing 2 different jobs, thousands of years apart. You think staying put is the safe default setting of being human. Actually, staying put has never once been how your line survived. Every generation between the first footprint out of Africa and you made a choice to keep moving when stopping was right there available. Easier. The chain only had to break once. It never did. You get anxious when your phone loses signal for 10 minutes. Somebody in your direct bloodline once stepped off the edge of everything they'd ever known. Ocean, ice, unmapped coastline, didn't matter which, with zero way to ever find out if they'd made the right call. And they kept walking anyway, not once, over and over for 60,000 years across every generation, on every continent except one. Go back to the edge of that continent from the very start of this. No path, no people, nothing ahead that anyone recognized. That moment didn't happen once. It happened over and over on every coastline, every ice sheet, every strait, for 60,000 years straight, on every continent except one. And every single time, at least one person chose to keep walking instead of staying where it was safe. Every person watching this right now is the unbroken end of that chain. Not descended from the cautious ones, descended from the ones who left. You can fly across the planet in 14 hours, watch a movie, and complain about the legroom. It took your ancestors 10,000 years to make a trip you'll forget about by tomorrow morning. They never got to know if it was worth it. You're the answer.